At this point, I don't get what Joey's plan is for this company. I mean, a bendy 2D platformer? Does Joey really think we have the time to make that on top of everything else? Seriously? I mean, what does he think this new game is going to do for the brand? I can't help but feel like it's just going to confuse the message when you put a platformer next to some of the, other stuff we've made that little devil do. I would have thought it would just be better to focus on the animations in Bendyland and keep it at that. But no, we need to expand the brand and keep up with the trends. I'm going to have a serious talk with him about this later. And if he refuses to listen to what I have to say, I'm out of here.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome to What If, the series that asks what would happen if gaming looked just a little bit different, where today, we're going retro. No, not like that. No, not like that either. Look, I'm not talking about old games, okay? By retro, I mean old-timey cartoons, and by old-timey cartoons, I mean today, we're talking about Bendy and the Ink Machine. Yeah, anyone remember this game? It hasn't been talked about online for a while, which is kind of a shame because both the art style and the story hidden just under the surface were both super interesting, and still are super interesting, even 2 or 3 years after the game concluded. When I discovered it, it was the first game I'd seen that had that kind of old-timey art style, and I don't know, it really captivated me. Little did I know that Cuphead would come out just a few months later. So today, I wanted to take that old-timey look and try and draw it in a different context, since, you know, that's kind of what we do here. So today, we're asking the question, what if Bendy and the Ink Machine was a 2D platformer instead of a 3D horror exploration game? Why a 2D platformer, you ask? Well, while there's a lot of 2D platformers that go for the retro feel in like pixelated art styles and such, there really aren't that many that go for really, really retro feel by taking inspiration from said old-timey cartoons. I mean, Cuphead did it, amazingly I might add, but it's really the only one I can think of, and trust me, I looked. So let's try and take Bendy's unique art style and transform it into something completely different, while also taking inspiration from Cuphead and other 2D platformers of a similar style. It can't be too hard, can it? It was. It really, really was. Oh god. Let me explain. This whole drawing ended up so much more difficult than I originally thought it would be. I mean, I had a pretty solid plan for how I was going to go about drawing this overall, but once I actually got into it, there were just certain points that turned into an absolute pain to make it look how I wanted it to. The first part that made me want to rip my hair out was when I was drawing Bendy himself. I began by basing his pose off of Cuphead, so I could get that more cartoony, sort of stringy... Is stringy the right word? What am I looking for? Like, rubbery art style? That doesn't sound like the right word, but we'll go with it. Rubbery art style down. And when it came down to neatening up to the design, most of this process was pretty easy, since Bendy is a pretty simple design to begin with. But when it came to colouring his face, oh boy, did that become more of a chore than I expected. Now, I love how the black and the light beige work together overall in this, and I love how the beige outlines contrast with the black and all that, but colouring the beige part of Bendy's face became one of the most frustrating things I think I have ever drawn. Admittedly, most of this was my own fault, since I didn't notice until after I had drawn everything that the beige part of Bendy's face had that little dip in the middle, and wasn't just a replica of the shape of his head. But when I tried to fix it, it just wouldn't work. God damn it, just... ah! And then when I finally fixed the dip in his face, the curves of his face weren't smooth, so I just had to keep drawing them and erasing parts over and over and over again, and it was such a pain. Funnily enough, the drawing ended up very much being one of sculpting rather than drawing. And once I sort of took that approach and kind of went about it in a different way, it finally ended up looking neater and a little more like actual Bendy. When that was all over with, I was happy with how he looked. I just wish it hadn't been such a pain to get to that point in the first place. Anyway, with all that done, I could finally move on to drawing the next part of this Bendy 2D platformer, and that was the background. Now, for this background, I wanted to make it look like the beginning of a level in this Bendy 2D platformer. To do this, I actually took the base for a platformer level I drew for an old GT Live animatic, of all things, on Mr. Bunnyman, that I never actually finished, and essentially drew over it so I wouldn't have to create a completely new level from scratch, because just in general, backgrounds really aren't my thing, and it was at this point that I reached the second annoying moment in this drawing process. Not as annoying as the bendy face, mind, but still pretty annoying. And that thing was the floorboards. You see, I wanted to try and replicate the wooden floor seen all over the original game, with its sort of wonky wooden boards and slightly rotten, unclean look, but god, did I underestimate how hard that would actually be to replicate. I really had no idea what I was doing here, honestly. I was just kind of throwing down colours and shapes in an attempt to make it look mildly similar, and then when I finally did reach something I was happy with, I found I couldn't just copy and paste it onto the other platforms because it didn't line up correctly. So I then had to try and replicate what I had just done whilst barely remembering the mix of brushes and colours I'd used to make it look that way in the first place. Like I said, backgrounds are not my thing. Now, I know it feels like I've done literally nothing but complain about this piece, but honestly, once all those annoying things were sorted out, the rest of the process was pretty simple. And honestly, I love how it turned out, especially the ink. I wasn't quite sure how to draw it at first, so I ended up googling some images of ink from, funnily enough, old-timey cartoons, and that really helped me to get the look I wanted. I just love how shiny and gooey it looks. I think the main reason I struggled with it to begin with was that ink doesn't necessarily pour like water does. Like I said, it's gooey and sticky and is generally a different liquid. So once I got out of the headspace of trying to make it look like water, I had a much better time with it. So here's a little tip for you when drawing ink. Make it stick to itself and gloop around, make it stick on surfaces, and most of all, make it nice and shiny by adding a lot of white marks on top. All of this will help it look less like black water and more like, well, ink. Once all that was done, it was time for the finishing touches. Firstly, I added a square of light on the wall to reference the blank projection of light seen on one of the walls of the game. And here's another drawing pro tip for you, since I'm apparently giving a lot of these out this episode. Opacity sliders, overlays, and soft brushes with a lot of brush sensitivity can work wonders in making light seem bright and glowy, while also cutting down the hassle of making sure the light reflects off correct surfaces. I mean that. If I'd gone through all of the hassle to try and manually paint all of the light on the surfaces of the platforms and stuff to make it look like it was reflecting off, it would have taken forever. But just some opacity tweaking and some overlays made it so much easier. Secondly, I added some of the writing you see scrawled on the walls in the original game, in ink, and then positioned this a little off screen to show that there's more to the level than what I've drawn here. After that was done, I decided to add a little video gamey touch that I haven't actually added to any of my other drawings so far when I'm drawing, actual video games. And that thing is hearts, a life meter. Black, inky, goo-dripping hearts that I think fit perfectly in a game like this. Oh, and I also took a chunk out of one because, well, if I was playing this game, I would have definitely lost at least one life already. I'm not good at platformers. And with that, and one last grimy overlay to really sell that old-timey look, I was finally done. So let's take a look at the finished result, shall we? And there we go. Like I said before, I am so happy with how this turned out despite all the struggles. I've heard the phrase every drawing goes through an ugly phase before, and damn, that couldn't have been more true for this piece. But we got there in the end, and I am really proud of myself for finishing this. So, there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this drawing down in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more art like this being drawn every single week. And like this video if you enjoyed it. Thanks again, and like I just said, I'll be back with another video next week. See ya!